Hey everybody, just a little Sunday afternoon chaplain's time for you. I'm doing it a little early today. I did it on Wednesday of last week because I am hoping to be trick-or-treating with my kids later. Thankfully the rain has finally stopped. Our teenagers are over having lunch right now, and so I can't guarantee that there won't be some kind of weird background noise while I check in with you for just a few minutes. But I did want to join you for just a brief reflection today, like we've talked about doing on the weeks that we don't have worship. Quickly before the reflection, I'd love for you to join us next Sunday night for worship. We're taking ECC Church on the road. Join us at Epiphany Church in Rumford at 5 p.m. Bring a mask, cool mask when we're inside, but we will sing and enjoy being together and worship, and we'd love to have you in person with us next Sunday. As for today, I follow a woman on social media. Her name is Mel Robbins, and she's an author, and she's a motivational speaker, and she does a lot with kind of the science of the brain to help in her motivational work for us and to help us figure out our own brains and how to use them in our favor instead of working against us. And she just came out with this book. It's called The High Five Habit. And what she figured out in this book, I haven't read the book because reading books is not always my strong suit, but I love to read a couple of paragraphs about a book or watch a quick video. So what she says in this book is that she's discovered that she's done some research, and evidently, according to her research, and I don't know the source, 50% of us don't even look at ourselves in the mirror every day. And of the 50% of us that do look at ourselves in the mirror, we tend to instantly criticize ourselves or see something in the mirror that we don't like. And I told that to the kids this morning at church, and they all kind of nodded their heads in agreement that that is their experience. And I know a lot of the time it's been my own. And so what Mel says in her work in this new book, The High Five Habit, is she encourages people to go ahead and look at themselves in the mirror every morning and give themselves a high five. Because she says when you high five somebody, something actually happens in your brain that actually it really lifts your spirits and it gives you a little boost. And so she started this idea that if we could just start each day giving ourselves a high five in the mirror, then it would help give us a little burst of confidence to start our day on the right foot. It's a little hokey, but I'm not ashamed to tell you I've tried it. And it sort of works. Gives you something to do when you look at yourself in the mirror besides just immediately find something that you want to critique or criticize or something that you wish was different. And there is something kind of silly and fun about starting instead by saying like, high five, you did something well. I couldn't help but think about this. The gospel passage that's assigned for today is the greatest commandment passage, which is when someone says to Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? And he says, the first is that you should love your God above with your whole heart and mind and soul. And the second is that you should love your neighbor as yourself. And I mean, a lot of us have heard this passage, we know it. And for those of us who are on a Christian journey, I think the church has worked really hard to ensure that we are practicing love of neighbor in all we do. Obviously, love of God as well, but love of neighbor too. And I think that loving our neighbor is so important. Welcoming the stranger, helping the refugee, helping the oppressed, helping somebody who's maybe not oppressed or a stranger, but right next to you who needs your love and care. And so obviously, I'm in full support of loving our neighbor. But I think sometimes what happens is we overlook the second part of what Jesus says here, that it's about loving your neighbor as yourself. I think sometimes we skip over the part about loving ourselves, or we hear it as this criticism from Jesus, right? That you're self-absorbed and you love yourself too much and you need to love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. When the reality of what I know about most of the humans that I encounter, it isn't that they love themselves too much. Their priorities might be askew sometimes. But actually, if I were to name a problem, it's that we don't love ourselves enough, that we don't believe in our belovedness enough. And that, in fact, that is what causes us to not love our neighbor well, because we can't love ourselves well. And so when I heard Mel Robbins talk about this statistic that so many of us look in the mirror and see something to criticize, I thought that lines up. It lines up with what I know to be true, and it lines up with my belief that the best path to healing for us is to know that we are beloved by God, and to believe that, and to believe in that belonging in our core. And the best way that I know to learn about that belovedness is by loving God. That first commandment, it makes sense. I have tried my whole life to find belonging and belovedness with other humans. Of course we do that. It's the most natural thing in the world. But we have to also remember that humans are human and they let us down. And so there have been times where I've put too much stock in the belongingness and belovedness that I find in another human, and then I inevitably hit a bumpy patch. And if that's what I'm basing my sense of love and worth on, then I'm going to run into trouble. But by loving God, by focusing my relationship on God, by believing in my belovedness from God, that gives me this lasting security, this lasting belonging and love of self that compels me to love neighbors in a way that can be more pure and transformational and lasting, instead of my own sense of self getting in the way when I'm trying to help somebody else. So I think sometimes when I think that God is constant and consistent in God's love for us. And sometimes we mix that up a little bit too, like thinking, why did God do this thing to me? Or why is God testing me like this? But I think that's just us being human, trying to figure out the world. I really believe that God doesn't let us down, that God's love for us is consistent, even in the times when we might be muddling through the darkness and we can't always see that love. So my chaplain's time message to you is to share with you what I shared with the teenagers that I sat with this morning. I started a church called Church of the Beloved because I have heard over and over people talk about their experience of life and feeling like they don't fully grasp how beloved they are by God, how important they are in the world, how much they are loved. And so if there is anything that I want anyone that I know or work with or encounter to know, it is that love. I want you to know that great love. I want you to believe in your core that you are beloved by God. And sharing that loving relationship with God will give you, I truly believe, that loving relationship with yourself. And then from there, the natural desire to want to share that love with our neighbor, we can't keep it in, even if we try. If we're holding on to that belovedness and belonging, our natural instinct will want to be to reach out to others and share that care and concern with others. But don't skip the part about loving yourself. Don't ignore that. It is so important. And you are so loved by me, but much more importantly, by God. So beloveds, I hope you can hold on to that love. I hope you can learn to look at yourself and love what you see, and let your love of God and self compel you to love those around you. Have a beautiful Sunday, friends. Thanks for joining me.